Jamaica's history is marked by tragedy and mystery. And in today's compilation, we're taking a deep dive into 6 events that left a lasting impact. We'll be covering the Bog Walk Tragedy, where 33 men met their doom in the dark, suffocating depths of the Bog Walk Tunnel. Also, the horrifying Eventide Home Fire, where flames consumed a sanctuary for the elderly, killing 153 old women in a night of pure devastation. Then there's the Avianca plane crash, a disaster that sent shockwaves across the nation. And that's just the start. We're uncovering 6 of the darkest moments in Jamaica's past. So stick around, because it only gets darker with each story.
If you're watching this video, then it simply means you're interested in history. If you're interested in history, then I think you have came across this story on the internet before, but this is the declassified version. In 1904, it was the largest pipe in the world, 6,200 feet long, 8 feet in diameter, weighing 1,700,000 pounds and 260,000 rivets holding it together. At that time, guys, I think that was the only thing Jamaica could boast about having the largest in the world. The early morning of June 24th, 1904, dawned clear and crisp. In Spanish Town, St. Catherine, and other areas outside of Kingston, men and women were lined up waiting to catch their tram to work as usual, as we all do. They waited until they realized it was not coming. The lucky ones caught rides in wagonettes and buggies. The unlucky set out on foot. No one was quite sure what had happened, only that there had been a temporary delay that would soon be fixed. By the time 8 o'clock rolled around, wild rumors had begun to circulate about a horrible accident at the Bog Walk power station that had affected the tramcar system run by the West India Electric Company. It was said that up to 80 men who had been cleaning silt and debris in the 8-foot-long cast iron pipe, also known as a flume, that carried water from the Rykob River to the power station, had been washed away into the turbines and drowned. The collection of silt and debris was not uncommon, nor was the need for it to be removed so as not to inhibit the flow of water and therefore of the hydroelectric power. Nothing like this had ever happened before. By 9 o'clock, railway stations, newspaper offices, and just about anywhere information could possibly be found were packed with anxious inquirers. Much later, the only news to be had was that 33 coffins were sent out to Bog Walk by train. In Bog Walk, by this time, crowds had gathered at the power station. According to Dr. Hammond, who was called to the scene, it was one he would never forget as long as he lived. Men, women, and children lying on the ground, rolling over, clutching handfuls of grass, stones, and earth, and screaming aloud in the last extremities of mental agony, as they searched for their loved ones who seemed to be lost to them forever. At that time, 33 were believed dead and 17 missing. A few hours later, it was confirmed that the 17 had managed to escape through a manhole near the dam itself. At 1 o'clock in the morning, 61 men had gone down into the huge pipe located about 15 yards from the power station. The pipe curved slightly upward and then sharply downward, running directly into the power station itself. The men encountered about a foot of water and got down to work as usual. Colin MacDonald, one of the survivors, in speaking to a Gleaner reporter at the scene, explained that within an hour of going into the pipe he felt the water level rise, but he didn't think it was anything to worry about. It couldn't have been coming from the dam because the dam was closed. It was always closed when the men were working in the pipes. But the water kept rising slowly but surely, and by 4 a.m. the men started to panic. Their supervisor, a Mr. Doe Parosel, apparently tried to keep his men calm by telling them there were plenty of time to get out. There was an exit closer to the dam, but his men panicked and threw their torches into the water so that they were all covered in darkness. Jano. Soon it was said a man appeared at the manhole with a torch, lighting the way and calling to the men. 28 managed to get out. In over 20 minutes it took for the water to fill the pipe. If they had listened and remained calm, site reports reveal the 20 minutes could have saved 300 men instead of 33. Me say anyhow them are Christian, and them sit them on there with the light or the manual. You know that story. We're not going at that. According to Gleaner records of the event, Dope Rosel, distraught by the experience and trying to best to come to terms with his catastrophe, could only seem to say that the water must have over time swelled to the point where it rushed over the sand and debris to flood the pipe. Although no one lived to tell this tale, it is believed that 3 of the men located in a very narrow section of the pipe and panic-stricken, Dope Rosel explained, had tried to exit through a 2-foot 8-inch wide manhole at the same time and effectively formed a human plug, entombing all 30 behind them. These 33 were found drowned, all heaped together, their clothes torn, their faces and bodies completely mutilated. Within a few days, the tram system was back in operation, as usual. Meanwhile, families who had lost fathers, brothers, and cousins tried to come to terms with their losses. Although the West India Electric Company behaved very sympathetically towards the families, helping to organize funeral services and financial retribution, the general feeling was that someone had blundered somewhere for that level of water to have appeared. Ensuing investigations ruled the catastrophe an accident, small consolation to the many who suffered great losses. I can bet, I just feel like them did owe them Monday some money. Today, the Bog Walk power station stands closed. In the 1930s, the tramcar system was replaced by a bus system. The tram lines were uprooted and replaced with wider roads. Some lines, such as the one at Crossroads, do still exist. The tramcar stopped running in 1948. As for the large pipe in which so many drowned alive, only a shell remains, preserving the memory of the catastrophe on that June 24th morning.
Kendall, Manchester, a sleepy town in south-central Jamaica. It's almost midnight on the 1st of September 1957. The residents of the town are fast asleep, but in a few minutes, their lives will be changed forever. A passenger train traveling from Montego Bay, which is scheduled to make a stop at the Kendall station, is out of control. The operator tries to stop it, but the brakes don't work. The 1,600 passengers on the train are not aware of the tragedy that awaits them. As the train was approaching a bend in the tracks, the speed caused the coaches to sway. Then there was a horrific jolt, and the tremor likened to that of an earthquake. 8 of the 12 coaches were wrecked, and 171 souls were plunged into eternity, while 700 lives were changed forever. But how did this happen, and why did the brakes not work? Was it an accident or a case of sabotage? At the end of this video, please let me know what you think. This is the story of the Kendall train crash, the worst rail disaster in Jamaica's history. On the fateful night of September 1st, 1957, 1,600 passengers were cramped into a 12-car, 2-engine diesel train on their way to Kingston after a hot, long day in Montego Bay. They were traveling back from a church picnic, exhausted from their day-long trip. It was fast approaching midnight. By now, exhaustion had turned to fatigue. They were sweating and barely able to breathe, and desperate to find comfortable standing positions. Traveling alongside members of the Holy Name Society of St. Anne's Roman Catholic Church were about 100 notorious criminals, pickpockets, and drunkards. At every stop, more of the nefarious outlaws squeezed in. Soon they began wreaking havoc, taking full advantage of the opportunity to commit crimes that the overcrowded train carriages presented to them. Passengers noticed how fast the train was speeding, but were most probably too exhausted and exasperated with the convicts to pay much attention. No one, not a single soul, could possibly anticipate what awaited them. Crammed into those overcrowded carriages were mothers, fathers, aunts, uncles, sisters and brothers, nieces, nephews, cousins, and grandparents. All had hopes and aspirations that were to be prematurely snatched away from them, as the ill-fated train they were traveling on raced along the track on its way to Kendall in Manchester. Not a soul knew
They were destined to become part of the worst train crash in Jamaica's history and the second worst rail disaster in the world at the time. The train was coming to a bend in the line, witnesses say, at a considerable speed because the coaches were swaying and actually passing through a narrow cutting in the rock when there was a horrific jolt and the swaying like that of an earthquake. The brakes were either not applied or failed to act, since the engines came loose from the train and ran on for some distance before being brought to a stop. After stopping briefly, the engines went on to Kendall station where the alarm was raised. One of the coaches, its superstructure raised to the flooring, remained on the lines and ran on for about 100 yards. Of the remainder, 5 toppled into a gully beside the track. 2 remained in the cutting. 1 mounted its bank. The one behind was raised up so that its body came off under the undercarriage and the front wheels were lifted off the line. Only the last 2 coaches remained undamaged. Most of the passengers in the 4 rear coaches escaped unharmed except for shock and minor injuries, such as cuts and bruises. The remaining coaches were in utter shambles, with dead and injured inside and underneath them. Survivors screaming, calling for help, or crying the names of relatives and friends. Of the derailed coaches in the gully, one was smashed to slivers, with the wheels lying to one side. Another was a mere strip of smashed boarding lying partly on the wheels, partly on the roof of another coach lying at an angle and on its side. The next had broken in unequal parts, the larger forward section lying on its side, the smaller still on the line and decoupled, but stripped of root and the sides. The last had its side torn out. Food, clothing and utensils could be seen strewn over the floor under the semi-collapsed roof. If you want to see more videos like these on the channel, click the like button, as that really helps. Reports later confirmed that the closure of an angled wheel brake cock had been incorrectly placed. That blunder was the main event leading up to the bloodied carnage that unfolded that night. Another contributing factor was the sheer speed at which the train was traveling. This resulted in the train cars colliding into each other. The tremendous speed at which the train was traveling left hundreds of mangled bodies strewn over 2 acres of land. To this day, no one has ever been charged or even questioned concerning that horrendous error pertaining to the brakes, nor has anyone questioned about the possibility that perhaps someone might have deliberately interfered with the brakes on that train. Could it have been sabotage? Perhaps. No one knows. Survivors had their suspicions. Some indicated that they suspected the brakes on the train had been tampered with by one or more of the hooligans who boarded the train that night. But if it was their intention to kill all or some of the passengers on the train, this would have been questionable, perhaps. To my mind, this theory makes no sense. Would the criminals on board this train deliberately endanger themselves? This theory appears unlikely, meaning the criminals who had boarded the train would have deliberately endangered themselves. Who in their right mind would have done that? Unless foresight was not one of the criminals' talents. So, unless the prosecution can prove that they were on a suicide mission, and that again don't make no sense. So unless the prosecution could prove that they were on a suicide mission, and that don't make no sense again. If the brakes had indeed been tampered with, and there was sufficient evidence, then this premature tragedy would most certainly have been a homicide. Manslaughter, at the very least. Manslaughter by itself is a lesser crime than murder. So in order for there to be any concrete conviction of murder, the elements of crime needed to be present and proven. These are acts, reus, a guilty act, and mens rea, a guilty mind. The prosecution would have to prove that the criminals on the train committed the crime, which would have been simple enough. However, no criminal investigations were ever conducted. This disaster ended up being dubbed an accident. Yet this tragedy may well have been as a result of mischief or total negligence on the part of engineers. Nevertheless, the prosecuting counsel could have argued that it wasn't necessary to prove that the guilty party were aware that a crash would occur as a result of their action, and this would have been sufficient mens rea. Another aggravating factor may be the sheer number of people who died. The most straightforward way to get a conviction in this case, nevertheless, would be by charging them with manslaughter. Therefore, if the jury is inclined to agree with the reasonable man test, the culprits would likely be convicted of voluntary manslaughter. It must be categorically stated, though, that whether to convict or not to convict is a task for the jury and not the judge. According to Section 9 of the Offences Against the People's Act, the sentence for manslaughter conviction can be life imprisonment with or without hard labor. The sentence is meted out at the discretion of the court and in the interest of justice. In criminal law, the burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. This means that the burden is on the prosecution to prove to the jury without a shadow of a doubt that the alleged wrongdoers are guilty of the crime. If the prosecution fails to do so, and there is doubt in the minds of the jury, then the jury must not convict the alleged wrongdoer. The role of the defense in a criminal case is to answer the case the prosecution presents, and to put forward a defense or rebuttal to the charges. Many among us may be of the opinion that justice was never served for the many that lost their lives in the carnage of September 19, 1957. It is quite possible, though, that the individual or individuals responsible may have perished on that fateful night. But is that justice? It is also likely that whoever was responsible for that terrible crime, if it was a crime and not accidental or worse, carelessness, may well have survived and continued to live a normal life or lives. There were no justice on the part of those who lost their lives, and perhaps no justice for those left behind to grieve the loss of their loved ones. Those responsible for killing hundreds of people never faced the consequences, so this case remains unsolved. Thank you.
When Jamaica Defense Force soldiers slaughtered 5 men from the Central Kingston community of Southside in the early morning hours of January 5, 1978, Jamaica reacted with shock and disbelief. Welcome back to Elite Jamaica, the place you come to learn about Jamaica and Jamaicans. If it's your first time joining me here, consider subscribing to the channel by clicking that red subscribe button, and do remember to turn on notifications by clicking that bell icon so you never miss any of my updates.
The man say, who don't come meeting can't come again when the next man them come back and so the work start. But that is a trick for us draw out everybody. Because dead are dead, man. You know, get no work, see? But that is just a trick for me.
5 other men escaped the incident, known later as the Green Bay Massacre. Now, one of 3 surviving members of the group of 10 that made the trip to the rugged St. Catherine terrain located in the Elsha Hills is counting his blessings as he relived the epic drama that unfolded. The men were caught in the middle of a covert military operation that lured them into an ambush in the promise of getting jobs paying $300 a week and the possibility of acquiring guns, a coroner's inquest heard later. Green Bay is the worst thing that ever happened to me, Delroy Anthony Griffiths, the only one who still lives in Jamaica, said. People are still talking about it. Even though so many have died in Garden, that is Tivoli Gardens, sometimes people stop me, wanting to give them history. Sometimes they will give me money, said the man who was 23 years old when the incident occurred. Griffiths, now approaching 58, still lives in Southside and frequently traverses the Foster Lane, Last Street and Lad Lane areas of the bruising inner city community. They promised us jobs paying $300 a week, which was big money in those times, Griffith, who is also called Jadabrag or Green Bay, recounted. Them times I used to run Lad Lane. After watching the show the night called The Godfather, I heard men talking about the trip and saying who don't come meet a big man who giving out work can't come again. But that was a trick to draw out everybody. You were going to die. You were not going to get any work. It was just a trick, stated Griffiths. Initially, 14 men were recruited to make the trip, but only 10 went, as the others either had a change of heart or slept late. But Griffiths remembered the gory details of the operation that left a stain on the JDF. I said I didn't want to know that there was work, and I don't turn up for it, because I had my children going to school, so I said I was going for myself, he related. They woke me up the morning and told my baby mother that I would soon return. One of the youth was sleeping and I pushed my mouth up to kiss him and said, Paulette, me nah bother kiss him, he soon come back, and I put him down. They brought an ambulance and a van. I went into the blue van at Last Street. When we reached, my teeth were hurting.
Come say waiting up and come waiting up. And tell my baby man, say, watch out. And soon come, not tell her when you go. I want to meet you up and I take him up and go so. My mouth reach near to him to kiss him and I say, Paulette, I nah kiss him, I soon come back and put him down. And charge them. Well, them bring an ambulance and a van. Me going at the blue van up at Last Street. I was going at like a city. See? Mom, it gone all the money. More money to come to, but you to hide the plan because $300 enough money then time, See? Well, when me reach now, my teeth kind of,
They took us to a spot at Elsha and told us to stay here. So. They said that every man should stand one place and they set us up in front of the high-powered general-purpose gun, which we didn't know about. They then took the head one away, saddled Winston Hamilton to where the big gun was. Give him one shot and then turn the big gun on everybody, said Griffiths. Anybody who was not hit by that gun, the maca prickles that you had to run into would rip you up and tear you up. I ran away when the shooting started, and while I was going through the maca, I met up on a soldier, so I turned off and ran. He shot at me and I ran away on a lonely road until I reached on a little hill with the sea below, he said. I spent the entire day in the bushes and made my way down from the rocks toward the sea, when I saw some fishermen way out. Went on a rock and signaled an X sign to them. I took nearly 20 minutes to make the X sign, and I saw a man put up his hand. The fishermen came towards me and said I had to tell them what's going on. I said that the soldiers were coming, and if they saw us, they would spray us with bullets. The water over that side was cold and shark infested. My knees were knocking, Griffiths recalled. I jumped off in the cold water, got into the boat, and they took me toward Greenwich Farm. When I reached there, I took off towards Caymanas Park, before realizing that I should be going the other way towards Southside. It was like I had lost my mind, he said. I saw some men at the betting shop at Harbour Street and told them that they had just killed some men, and they said I was joking. By this time, the other men who escaped went through the Macan into the hills. As it turned out, every man who was killed has a bullet hole in his head, Griffith said. I escaped because I went to watch a movie called Honor Thy Father the night before and seen the guns and people saying, "Eat the dirt." So I was crawling on my hands and knees when the firing started. It's that me use upon them, Griffith stated. Griffiths believed that the move was politically motivated, as Southside has always been known as a stronghold of the Jamaica Labour Party, and the ruling People's National Party at the time was preparing for fresh elections, which came 2 years later and resulted in defeat for the then Michael Manley-led regime. It's because election was coming on why them killed the man them, Griffiths maintained. Right after the shooting, police and soldiers curfewed the place, Southside. They had a curfew in the Barry Lane, Lad Lane area, but them other man survive as a fool because them put on black as them come back. The police and soldier them detain every man who wear black, he said. I was just walking around passing the soldiers who did not recognize him. Then I sit in my yard eating some fish and rice and saw them coming, so I opened the door wide, but them didn't say anything to me. I was trembling. The next Sunday morning, they had another curfew. They said that nobody can cross from one side to the next, but I beat them still and cross over, even with a jar of weed in my pocket. I then went to Manchester to hide at my auntie, but after that, Sister Benedict from Holy Family School contacted me to come and give a statement to Mr. Brown from Flying Squad in her office. She said that no police could trouble me, so I went back to Kingston and gave the statement, he said. After that, lawyers Winston Sparling and Abe Dabdoob took up the case and started to carry us to court in the mornings, Griffith said. 10 members of the JDF, some of them members of the military intelligence unit, were later slapped with charges relating to the incident. 7 of them were charged with murder, while 3 were charged with conspiracy to murder. 2 of the murder accused, including the head of the operation, Major Ian Robinson, were also cited for conspiracy to murder. After the coroner's inquest held in Spanish Town found that persons were criminally responsible for the men's death. The JDF maintained that the men went to the firing range to collect the guns smuggled into the island and were surprised by a special strike force which returned gunfire after the men shot at them. How much time we hear them thing here? Jano. Residents of Southside demonstrated against the act, which prompted the inquest and later the trial. All 10 were freed by a jury at the end of the trial in the Manchester Circuit Court between June and July 1982. It also emerged in court that the JDF had used an L8 General Purpose Machine Gun, GPMG. I'm going to put one of those on the screen, guys, so you can see what I'm talking about, as well as self-loading rifles and Sterling submachine guns in the operation. The court also heard that the GPMG, that's the General Purpose Machine Gun, was rarely used by the army, so they planned for the man them. Griffiths, who before had other run-ins with the law enforcers, maintained that the Green Bay incident was the most devastating. Them killed them others for nothing. It was cold-blooded. I was very afraid. I was trembling. I didn't believe that I would have made it out alive, he stated. Even when I was running away and heading towards the sea, I kept hearing bow, bow, all single shots to the heads of those who were lying on the ground. The soldiers went over them and shot all of them who were lying on the ground, he alleged. That was wicked. The general purpose gun is one that them use in war and can fire over 600 rounds per second. Real thing that, guys. When that lick you can't move, Griffiths argued. No man no have no time for ball out because when the gun turn on, you just a scatter. When they fired it, it's pure blue film, you see. The place just light up. It was a wicked gun. When I was crawling away on my belly, sand was stinging me in my face. The soldier was firing at me and missing, and I couldn't run back to the entrance at the firing range because they would have killed me, he said. The men slaughtered were identified as Norman Gutter Thompson, an outstanding Santos Football Club and Jamaican footballer who had a previous conviction of shoplifting while the Jamaica team toured Bermuda, Glenroy Richards, Martin Howard, Winston Hamilton, and Trevor Clark. Only Hamilton did not have a conviction. Apart from Griffiths, those who survived were Rudolph Nesbitt, Anthony Spencer, Ian Brown, and a man known only as the alias Firebooger. Griffiths appeared to be closer to Thompson, a Rastafarian, who law enforcers presented as a man who had several acts of indiscretion. Me and Gutter Thompson were close. We used to cook, eat, and sleep. We used to go to jail all the time for vagrancies, Griffiths stated. I went to jail for store lifting, too, boss. Me not hide and talk, but me never used to trouble poor people things. I went to jail 2 times for store lifting, he said. It's enough time I got through that and come back. You see this? Pointing to a missing left finger. Is a machete do this. A man chopped me straight through my hand. But me wrong still. Him chopped the finger deep and then finished cut it off a hospital. Me take with something from a firm straight up, me not lie. But I don't bother with them things anymore. Me I behave myself now, Griffiths insisted. Tomorrow, we take a look at the Black Friday massacre in Jamaica.
Everybody is in a panic because we have been victimized. We have not known what is going to happen to us.
The Coral Gardens incident, also known as the Coral Gardens atrocities, the Coral Gardens massacre, the Coral Gardens riot, and the Bad Friday, refers to a series of events that occurred in Jamaica from April 11 to 13, 1963. Following a violent altercation at a gas station in Montego Bay, Jamaican police and military forces detained Rastafarians throughout Jamaica, killing and torturing many. Exact numbers are not available, but estimates place the number of detained individuals as high as 150. Welcome back to Elite Jamaica, the place you come to learn about Jamaica and Jamaicans. If it's your first time joining me here, consider subscribing to the channel by clicking that red subscribe button, and do remember to turn on notifications by clicking that bell icon so you never miss any of my updates. I'm on the mission. Today is the day. The years prior to the Coral Gardens incident, we saw the building of tensions between the Rastafarian community and the British colonial government in Jamaica. In 1958, British police engaged in several arrests and evictions of Rastafarians, often bringing to bear charges for the possession of cannabis, which is used as a Rastafarian religious sacrament. Several of these incidences resulted in police killings of Rastafarians, and some of those arrested were reportedly never seen again. Due to alleged violence on the part of Rastafarians and public discourse which emphasized anti-social aspects of the Rastafarian faith, public opinion in Jamaica largely sided with the police against the Rastafarians. In 1959, a confrontation between a Rastafari security guard and a policeman at Coronation Market resulted in the police beating the security guard, which prompted a violent response from nearby shop owners. The police brought reinforcements, arresting 57 Rastafarians and brutally beating and forcibly shaving the dreadlocks off of some of them. A police car and fire truck were also set on fire during this incident. Later that year, Rastafari leader Reverend Claudius Henry was accused of plotting a revolution and communicating with Fidel Castro. In 1960, Henry's son Reynold was arrested on the grounds of plotting a revolution, and following a declaration of state of emergency, Reynold Henry and his co-conspirators were executed. Following these events, the government began to arbitrarily arrest members of the Rastafari community under the justification that Rastafarians were involved in orchestrating a communist revolution. In 1962, Jamaica would win its independence, but anti-Rastafarian sentiment continued to be prevalent in the Jamaican government and the police forces, which increasingly viewed the Rastafarians as a security threat. In police training schools, officers would often train using images of Rastafarians as target practice. This sentiment was echoed in general society as well, with Rastafarians often being beaten by civilians, forcing Rastafarians to avoid public spaces. Coral Gardens was part of a larger property, the Rosal Estate, which includes the Rosal Mansion. This property was the site of both small-scale farming by Rastafarians, as well as the ambitions of landlords and the government officials who hoped to convert the area into a tourist destination. The government and landlords saw the Rastafarians as an obstacle to their goal of repurposing the property for tourism, and frequently sent police to evict the Rastafarians. In one such incident, in 1961, police attacked Rudolph Franklin, shooting him 6 times in the stomach and leaving him for dead. Franklin received plastic surgery in a hospital to repair his stomach, but was reportedly told by a doctor that once the plastic rotted, his wounds would reopen and he would die. Following his surgery, Franklin was immediately arrested on the grounds of cannabis possession and sentenced to 6 months in prison. After his release from prison, Franklin reportedly swore to take revenge against the overseer who had attempted to evict him, Edward Fowler. Accounts differ as to the specifics of what happened on April 11th. According to police reports, a group of Rastafarians armed with spears, hatchets, and machetes set fire to a gas station as part of an attempted robbery. A skirmish resulted between the Rastafarians and the police who arrived at the gas station, resulting in the deaths of 3 Rastafarians, 2 policemen, and 3 civilians, also on the scene. A separate account, published in the Public Opinion and supported by relatives of Rudolph Franklin as well as a Syracuse professor Horace Campbell, asserts that the violence at the gas station was the result of previous conflicts between Franklin and other Rastafarians in the area on one hand, and the police and property owners on the other. Following the skirmish at the gas station, a police manhunt tracked down and killed the other Rastafarians that had been present at the skirmish. Jamaican newspapers, such as the Daily Gleaner, published many articles demonizing the Rastafarians and demanding armed intervention by the state. Media also originally described the events at Coral Gardens as an uprising, and were later forced to retract their characterization of the event by the Labour Party-led government. On April 12, Good Friday, Prime Minister Alexander Bustamante gave an order to bring in all Rastas, dead or alive. Police and military forces entered working-class neighborhoods and Rastafari encampments to detain Rastafarians and forcibly cut the dreadlocks off those who were detained. Many Rastafarians were tortured and killed, and the exact tally is unknown. One estimate suggests that as many as 150 individuals were detained over the following day. Following the events of April 11 to 13, 2 narratives of the incident emerged. One view held that the events of the Good Friday weekend constituted an unlawful uprising by the Rastafarians. This view was supported by contemporary media reports of the events and the statements of government officials at the time. Meanwhile, the Rastafarian community in Jamaica held that the actions of Rudolph Franklin and his compatriots were a justified reaction to decades of persecution by the government and perceived the mass arrests that followed as an abuse of state powers, a view that has been reflected by more recent academic scholarship. The event has been commemorated yearly by the Rastafarian community in Jamaica. In 2011, a documentary film about the incident was released, titled Bad Friday, Rastafari After Coral Gardens. In 2015, public defender Arlene Harrison Henry submitted a report to the Parliament of Jamaica detailing an investigation of the Coral Gardens incident and recommending that the government provide financial reparations for the injuries, abuses, and deaths caused by its actions against the Rastafarian community. In April 2017, the government of Jamaica issued a formal apology for the incident, taking responsibility without equivocation and stating that the incident should never have happened. The government has established a trust fund of 10 million Jamaican dollars, that's 78,000 US dollars, for survivors as reparations for the incident. The government also promised to recognize Pinnacle, St. Catherine Parish, a site with historical relevance to the Rastafarian community, as a protected site under the Jamaica National Heritage Trust.
After recognizing the signs and possibly a scene of foreboding concerning the aircraft's engine troubles, 4 passengers decided not to board the aircraft. For them, their decision was to be a blessing in disguise. On Thursday, January 21st, 1960, Avianca Flight 671, a Lockheed Super Constellation, took off from New York Idlewild Airport, now known as JFK, for a flight to Bogota by way of Montego Bay and Barranquilla, Colombia. On board, there were 46 souls, 39 passengers, and 7 crew members. While en route to Montego Bay, the number 3 engine malfunctioned and was shut down, and because of that issue, Flight 671 diverted to Miami, arriving there about 4:30 p.m. Passengers were told that there would be a delay for repairs, and at 8 p.m. the plane was boarded again and Flight 671 taxied to the end of the runway for takeoff. But then there was still some mechanical trouble, and therefore they had to return to the airport terminal. This was rectified and the flight departed Miami at 12 minutes after midnight, the co-pilot being the pilot flying. Let me know, would you have stayed on that flight? Click the like button if you would have preferred to wait for the next flight. Upon arrival near Montego Bay, clearance was given for a standard instrument approach. A standard instrument approach allows pilots to align their aircraft with the runway and fly towards it without being able to see anything outside their windows. This enables them to fly into airports, even if they are obscured by clouds or fog, as long as the pilots can make visual contact with the runway environment before reaching what is known as their decision altitude height, or minimum descent altitude height. If visual contact has not been acquired at that point, they must either initiate a missed approach procedure, otherwise known as a MAP, or go back for another attempt. The airfield was sighted following the procedure turn at 2,000 feet, and the approach was continued visually as they were now able to see the runway. The pilots did the standard landing procedure, but after a heavy touchdown, the plane bounced, landed back on the runway, and skidded down the runway in flames, coming to rest inverted 1,900 feet from the runway threshold and 200 feet to the left. The Super Constellation burned for almost 2 hours, while the Airport Fire Brigade and the Montego Fire Brigade fought the blaze, after which police and the civil aviation officials combed the wreckage where the gruesome sight of charred remains of human bodies, some seemingly trying to escape, but most still strapped in their seats with hands covering their faces, told a story of desperate attempts to fend off the flames, while others were thrown from the aircraft and into the swamp waters. Eyewitnesses said that one of the giant craft's 4 engines exploded as the plane was touching down. It careened into a swamp bordering the airstrip and the gas tanks started to explode. Of the 46 passengers on board, 9 persons survived with minor injuries, including 4 passengers and 5 crew members. The dead were badly mutilated. No immediate identifications were possible, as the weather was already rainy and overcast when the plane started to set down for landing. Now, with the thick black smoke, there was no way to do identifications on the spot.
The dead included Thomas C. Capehart, son of Senator Homer E. Capehart of Rhode Island, and his wife Elizabeth. They boarded the plane at Miami with two others when the Constellation made that unscheduled stop because the number 3 engine was acting up. Of the survivors, 3 were Jamaicans, 1 a Caymanian, and others were passengers booked on vacation or business pursuits in Jamaica and South America. Among the survivors were the plane's captain, Mr. J. Duke, who with his co-pilot escaped through the emergency exit provided for operational crew. 3 other crew members also managed to escape the inferno. The fortunate passengers who survived are Mr. and Mistress Ian W. Kelton of Australia, Mr. R. A. Loven, and Mr. H. Whites, both of The Hague in the Netherlands. None of the survivors were seriously injured. 4 other passengers, one of them, Mr. Richard Osler, general manager of the Caribbean Cement Company at the time, had left the plane at Miami, refusing to continue the journey on the ill-fated aircraft. And I guess this was the reason why the plane was able to accommodate those 4 persons, the Capeharts, and the other 2 persons who boarded at Miami. The probable cause for this accident, as stated by the NTSB, is the adoption of a final approach path resulting in a heavy landing, during which a major structural failure occurred in the port wing in the immediate vicinity of Station 80 joint, caused by the transmission of stresses through the undercarriages in excess of those which would be encountered if the rate of sink of the aircraft at the time of impact had been controlled within the designed maximum of 10 feet per second. The primary responsibility for the safety of an aircraft and its complement is vested in the captain. However, there is evidence of mitigating circumstances in that the errors of judgment that precipitated the disaster reflect some deficiency of knowledge, which should have been instilled in the training and flight proficiency checking of the pilots of HK 177. A measure of responsibility for the accident must therefore devolve on the supervisory and advisory authorities for the overall conduct of the operation. If you found this video interesting,
a Jamaican military operation in 2010. 76 civilians reported dead.
Residents of downtown were shaken with fear as the security forces made their way into sections of Tivoli Gardens and Denham Town today.
These were the armed forces on the waterfront in downtown Kingston at about 1 p.m. in position in full gear as helicopters buzzed ahead and the Coast Guard patrolled the waters.
This bloody Labour Day in Kingston. We begin with news that the security forces have launched a massive offensive in Tivoli Gardens, West Kingston today.
Mass graves uncovered in Kingston's public cemetery.
the title of this video refers to the re-establishment of state authority in West Kingston and the Tivoli Gardens by the Jamaican security forces in May 2010 as an incursion. According to the public defender, this is how it was popularly known, although he thought it could be more accurately be described as a siege.
They're under orders to do what the they did.
Jamaica is an island nation in the Caribbean Sea, south of Cuba and west of the island of Hispaniola. Hispaniola is the landmass divided between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Jamaica was claimed for Spain by Christopher Columbus in 1494 and then taken by the English in 1655. It achieved independence in 1962 but remains in the British Commonwealth. It is a parliamentary democracy and a constitutional monarchy, with a Governor-General representing the Queen. Its population in 2010, when these events occurred, was 2.6 million, 90% of whom claim mainly African descent.
Dozens of deaths at the hands of the security forces, all because of one man.
Even though major crimes are on the decline in Jamaica, the country still has a high homicide rate of 43.85 per 100,000 inhabitants. This means
that Jamaica had about 1,393 reported murders in 2023, based on its estimated population of 3.18 million. This shows a 7.8% decline from 2022, when Jamaica had 1,511 murders. And with data available from 2012, Jamaica had the 6th highest homicide rate at 39.3 per 100,000 population that year. In 2006, with 1,674 homicides, the rate was 58 per 100,000, and possibly, in that year, the world's highest. The death penalty was reaffirmed by Parliament in 2008, although it is not used. Civil disturbance of a degree has been a feature of Jamaican history. In 1865, slavery having been abolished in 1835, there was a protest march by the impoverished black population that was ruthlessly put down by the colonial governor, Edward John Hare. The governor declared martial law and sent in troops. Several hundred of the population were subsequently killed as they were hunted down, arrested, and executed without recourse to what even then was regarded as proper process. A subsequent royal commission in England found that the governor acted with commendable promptitude but unnecessary rigor, words that resonated with the evaluation of the events in 2010. In 1938, there were labor riots and 15 deaths. In 2001, 27 civilians were killed in an event involving police in Tivoli Gardens, the same location as the current event.
A corporal was immediately shot and killed by gunmen whom we saw firing from the high-rise building in Tivoli.
There's a British-trained Jamaican Defence Force, the JDF, and the Jamaica Constabulary Force, the JCF. Together, these are referred to as the security forces. Christopher Dodos Coke was regarded as the preeminent Don in Jamaica. His base was in Tivoli Gardens, in the electorate of the Prime Minister at the time. Tivoli Gardens had a population in 2010 of approximately 10,000, including, in the words of one witness to the subsequent Commission of Inquiry, a cadre of uneducated, unemployed, and unemployable young people. They depended on the patronage of Coke for their livelihood. His father before him had led a gang in Tivoli Gardens. Coke took the title President. He led the presidential clique, and his girlfriend was popularly known as the First Lady. His gang had reached into other parts of Kingston and Jamaica through a less cohesive transnational organized crime network called the Shower Posse, and had overseas affiliates in Tampa, Miami, Ohio, and the UK. His criminal enterprise involved drug trafficking, arms trafficking, robbery, extortion, and kidnapping. The Commissioner of Police at the time described Tivoli Gardens under Coke as a state within a state. It was also called the mother of all garrisons. It is a community created by large-scale housing developments allocated by the state to supporters of the party in power. These partisans then pushed out the minority from within and guarded against invasion from outside. Utility companies could not go into the community to collect outstanding money, effectively making utilities free in Tivoli Gardens. Coke himself collected payments for these services. For 30 years before, police testified at the Commission of Inquiry. The JCF was unable to undertake regular policing in Tivoli Gardens. No police station had been situated there for many years. This was a recognition of the danger to police involved in having a presence there. A commission of inquiry had been held into a bloody confrontation between the security forces and the residents of Tivoli in 2001, resulting in 27 deaths. How they met their deaths was never established.
no one was held legally or administratively accountable. In 2001, the Commission concluded, and I quote, "There was abundant credible evidence from which it may be inferred that the twin issues of garrison communities and political tribalism cannot be eliminated as a feature of political and cultural life in Jamaica unless Tivoli Gardens is brought under the complete control of the JCF." End of quote. This was easier said than done because of the level of everyday violence. A component of Jamaica's high homicide rate is the frequency with which citizens die at the hands of the police. Police shot and killed 272 people in 2007, 224 people in 2008, and 263 people in 2009. In addition, 10, 19, and 12 police officers respectively died during the course of JCF operations in each of those years, almost all by gunshot wounds. Also, over this period, there were many other individual events of violence, including attacks on police stations, and when one of Coke's brothers was killed in 2005. On August 24, 2009, the heads of the security forces received the information that the United States government was actively seeking Coke's extradition from Jamaica. They immediately informed the Prime Minister, Mr. Golding, the leader of the Jamaica Labour Party government at the time. Almost immediately, according to intelligence, Coke fled his Luxor compound in regional Jamaica and went to his base in Tivoli Gardens. The government took 9 months to authorize his extradition, during which time public anxiety and unrest increased. The Prime Minister referred to legal and constitutional issues in the extradition request, leading to the considerable delay. The existence of these issues was subsequently confirmed by a special commission of inquiry convened in October 2010 to consider all the issues surrounding the request. As time passed, the US began refusing visas, amongst other actions, for members of the government wishing to travel to the US. Civil society groups became active. The opposition discovered a $400,000 payment to a US law firm to lobby in Washington against the extradition. When challenged with this, the Prime Minister responded that the money was paid by the Jamaica Labour Party, not by the government. This fact was also verified by the Special Commission of Inquiry, which was very critical of the payment, saying that it was inappropriate for the Prime Minister to arrange such a thing. Eventually, the Prime Minister apologized in Parliament. Then, without giving the security forces any advance notice, he announced the agreement of the extradition in a national address on public television on May 17, 2010. This was regarded by his opponents as effectively signaling the agreement to Coke, thus giving him time to disappear. The main Commission of Inquiry concluded that it was imprudent of the Prime Minister not to give the security forces notice of his intended announcement that Coke was to be arrested. They should not have learned this through the media. But the Commission made no formal adverse finding of the Prime Minister in this regard. He readily acknowledged merit in the point. The Commission was critical of the Commissioner of Police for not telling the Prime Minister and the Minister of National Security that it was important that they had some advance notice of the government's intention to act. The security forces stated that they used the 9-month delay to plan the joint operation for Coke's arrest. Although it was referred to as a joint operation, each force developed its own plan. The Commission of Inquiry found that neither heads of the JDF and JCF knew of the other's plans, although other officers did. The basic tasks were for the JDF to secure the sectors and then invite JCF to enter and conduct searches and other tasks appropriate for the civil power. The Commission of Inquiry was highly critical of the quality of planning and its implementation. The Commission of Inquiry states, and I quote, "Coke used the period to amass a substantial armory and recruit a large number of mercenaries to protect him from arrest. Gunmen from Tivoli Gardens and approximately 300 gunmen from across Jamaica were mobilized with a view to prevent the arrest of Coke.
The video evidence that they saw left no doubt in their minds that the special arming of criminal elements in Tivoli Gardens was no mere allegation. It was a fact of frightening proportions. The armory, which Coke established or to which he had access, was comprised of M16 and AK-47 rifles, handguns, grenades, at least one 50 caliber Grizzly sniper rifle, and a large quantity of ammunition. These rifles were no ordinary firearms. In the days leading up to the incursion, barricades were constructed within Tivoli Gardens. These were constructed of old vehicles, old appliances, heavy equipment, scrap metal, sandbags, and other solid materials. Several of the barricades had explosives embedded in them, with trigger mechanisms operable from inside residences. Sandbags were also used as firing positions. The commission concluded that amongst Coke's men were some with military experience to help plan and build the barricades. In addition, the National Intelligence Bureau had photographs of men piling sandbags in bulletproof vests, wearing night vision goggles, and carrying rifles. On May 18, people were in the streets of the capital, Kingston, demonstrating in favor of Coke and paralyzing the city. On May 20, 600 women dressed in white held a demonstration with placards saying variously, "Leave Dodos alone," "Next to God is Dodos," and "We will die for Dodos." Matters came to a head on Sunday, May 23. Criminal elements launched a series of attacks against police stations in West Kingston and related areas. These attacks were of such intensity that the heads of the security forces sought and obtained an urgent meeting of the Cabinet of Jamaica. The deteriorating security situation was explained to the Cabinet, which authorized the declaration of the state of emergency. The attacks resulted in 2 police stations being totally destroyed by fire, and a third being extensively damaged. A fourth was damaged by gunfire, and other assets, such as vehicles, were damaged. In the words of the Commission, resisting arrest and extradition had morphed into an open and violent assault against the state of Jamaica and its law enforcement agencies. The next day, May 24, 2010, the security forces moved into West Kingston.
The helicopters throwing grenades and
Approximately 800 soldiers of the JDF and 570 officers of the JCF were involved in the operation. The advance of the security forces was slowed, and in some instances halted by the ferocity of the resistance. Explosions, gunfire, and smoke could be heard and seen over the city. It took until around 4 p.m. on May 24 before the Tivoli Gardens was secured. It was clear that Coke had fled, if he was ever there at the beginning. By the next day, there were reports of hundreds dead. People phoned in to the radio station with reports of brutality, including throwing people off roofs. There was sporadic gunfire in other areas of West Kingston over the next few days. By the end of the week, 73 deaths were formally reported. The scale of the operation and its costs in blood and economic value were great and unprecedented in the history of the confrontations between the citizens and the security forces of Jamaica. 2 days after the launch of the operation, 69 civilians and 3 members of the security forces lay dead. The UN Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean estimated the total effect of the unrest on the economy of Jamaica at Jamaican $22.5 billion. That's US $258.8 million. Senior officers of the security forces readily described the operation as an event the like of which they had never before experienced in their many years of service. Equally, residents of West Kingston spoke of a frightening experience and being in a continuing state of fear and anxiety immediately before, during, and after the operation. However, Coke managed to escape the dragnet and remained at large for almost a month, until he was finally captured on June 23, 2010, by the police on the outskirts of Kingston. He was reportedly trying to surrender to the United States Embassy with the help of a local reverend, who was later charged with attempting to pervert the course of justice. Coke was extradited to the United States on June 24, 2010, where he pleaded guilty to racketeering and assault charges, and was sentenced to 23 years in prison in 2012. The West Kingston Tivoli Gardens incursion in 2010 marked a significant chapter in Jamaica's history, reflecting the complex interplay of politics, crime, and societal challenges. The operation, aimed at apprehending Christopher Dudus Coke, the notorious crime lord, revealed the deep-rooted issues within Tivoli Gardens and the broader implications for the nation. The confrontations between the security forces and the criminal elements led to unprecedented levels of violence, causing a substantial economic impact and leaving lasting scars on the affected communities. Thank you for joining us in exploring the gripping events surrounding the West Kingston or Tivoli Gardens incursion. If you found this video informative, please hit the like button, share it with others, and subscribe for more content on historical events and societal dynamics. Remember to leave your thoughts and comments below, and stay tuned for our next exploration into the complexities of the Jamaican history. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and thank you for watching.
Elite Jamaica. Don't forget to drop a like and a comment. Don't forget to subscribe.